Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Chadwick, and I'm the Master Gardener for Ross Seed Company. It is my pleasure today to introduce a guest, a fellow Master Gardener, Janet Horner. Janet is a former president of the Canadian County Master Gardeners and was and also a member of the Okies for Monarchs and was one of the 50 selected to be a certified hero for Monarchs. Her garden is certified as a Monarch way station, a National Wildlife Habitat, a North American butterfly garden and pollinator garden, and Janet raises monarchs and swallowtails from eggs found in her garden and gives demonstrations and presentations to groups throughout the county. She is here today to talk about some tips on starting your own garden for pollinators. My friend Janet.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for having me. I've gotten a lot of questions on just how you start a pollinator garden and what's important. So I thought Barbara invited me to come out and speak with you.
So Janet, what is a pollinator garden?
Well, a pollinator garden is one that invites your pollinators into your yard. And a pollinator is any insect or animal that can move pollen from one flower to another. And so a pollinator garden is a garden that allows those insects back into our gardens.
So why are pollinators so important to our gardens?
Well, it's been determined that the bee is the most important animal on the planet Earth. And without the bee and other pollinators, we wouldn't have 75% of our flowers. They wouldn't be pollinated. And 35% of our food comes from the pollinators, especially the bees. Our tree crops like peaches, apples, our melons, our bananas, strawberries, blueberries, and even chocolate and coffee. So they are very important.
So are the pollinators in trouble?
They are. There's been a lot of research, and it's been determined that we are losing 9% of our insects and bird populations every decade. And they've been keeping track of this since the 1970s. And there's a lot of reason for this. Mainly it's lack of habitat, the use of chemicals, insecticides, and things like that.
So the name Doug Ptolemy comes up. Can you tell us about who that is?
In 2006, he's an entomologist who wrote a life-changing book for all of us. It's called Bringing Nature Back Home. And what he noticed is, for decades, we've been bringing in non-native plants and shrubs to make our garden look pretty. But when he looked around, there were no insects. There were no birds on those Chinese plants. And so he wrote this wonderful book where he said, you know what, we've got to bring nature back in. Because if we don't, our birds won't survive for long.
So what can we do now to make this go right?
The main thing is when you're planting your garden, concentrate on native plants that are native to not only Oklahoma, but to North America. And the reason for that is our birds depend on the caterpillars that use the trees and shrubs to lay their eggs, and that's what their caterpillars eat. So my Chinese pistache that I planted before I knew better supports no life. There's nothing eating on it. Whereas our native oak, it supports over 500 caterpillars. And so you've got to have the caterpillars for their survival, and you've got to have the caterpillars for the birds to feed their young. It's all related.
So what have you brought for us today that you can show us?
Okay. These, as Barbara said, I raise monarchs and swallowtails from eggs that I bring in from my garden. And these are, I don't know if you can tell, but that's a first star monarch in the very first stage. And they have 5 instars. These are the eggs that I look for on only, a monarch will only lay eggs on a milkweed. That's the only plant. So if you want monarchs in your garden, you have to plant milkweed. It takes about 3 to 5 days for the eggs to hatch. Then they turn into an instar. It takes another 20 days for this to turn into a chrysalis. These are just about ready to form a chrysalis. And that's why pollinator gardens are so important. If you're wanting to attract certain butterflies to your garden, you have to know what their host plants are. For instance, swallowtails, they like members of the carrot family. So if you're attracting them, you need dill, fennel, parsley, things like that. And that's how you'll get those butterflies. If you want Gulf fritillaries, those pretty orange butterflies, plant passion vine. So when you start your pollinator garden, you're going to have to do some research, find out which butterfly you want to attract, and then plant those host and nectar plant. A host plant is a plant that hosts the caterpillars and the eggs. Nectar plant is what the adult will feed off of. And they don't have to be elaborate flowers. They can be zinnias, lantana, some just easy, flat daisies. They love that. And that'll bring the butterflies into your garden.
Well, Janet, I just think this information has been wonderful.
Thank you.
And that we're able to share it with the public. So I would want you all to know that we keep a list of butterfly garden flowers for the host and the nectar. It's free of charge. We have that for you if you're interested in becoming a butterfly garden and putting one in. I would suggest you come visit us at Ross and get that information. And be sure and remember that come spring when the garden center opens, we'll have all these plants for you to purchase. We will have master gardeners here to be able to visit with you about the different things that you need to do to make sure you are a successful butterfly gardening enthusiast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janet.